more than 1 million API requests a month.
Enjoy a networking service together? Magically go across cloud. You're also bound by the runtimes, the memory limit. The Lambdas or Azure Functions or any of the other lock you down to. So, for example, at the minute of work, we're doing a Excel parser that has to read in the whole file and validate it. So timeout limit on the Azure function, on the Lambdas. So we're streaming through the file rather than reading it all into memory like you traditionally would, because we tried using some libraries and they used about 8 gig of memory on a 2 gig Excel file because they read it in several times into memory. So you've got to be quite clever in some instances or work around it. But speaking of platforms, who's done stuff in Lambdas? We do. Oh dear. Yep. Azure Functions? Oh, I was really hoping to be more than that. I'm really a big fan of functions. Google Cloud Functions? Yep. Firebase? Oh, more than Firebase. That was surprising. Zeit? Yeah, cool. Anyone got any other ones that they recommend? Because quite a few. Anyone use more than one of them? Yeah, so this tends to be what I've found chatting to other people is they've used one, they really like it, and they stick with it, which is also a case of cloud lock-in, because once you use it and good at it, you may as well just keep using it, right? But it's worth trying a few because they all are a bit different. Which takes me on to tooling. So there's a variety of tooling available. So we're using AWS Lambdas at work, which are pretty good. But the tooling for other stuff is not so great. It depends kind of what you're aiming to do. It is getting better all the time because obviously serverless stuff is relatively fresh still, so things are getting better. Azure Functions, I would really recommend their tooling because if you use VS Code, you can literally deploy your functions from there, which I'll show you later, and is awesome at getting started really quickly. I'm going to do the same you did with Netlify and mention Azure Functions a lot because it's kind of my thing at the minute. It should be a drinking game, I think.
I will lose.
The only thing that can also be a bit of a pain is replicating everything locally the way it would in the cloud provider. So at work we're using local stack, which is supposed to replicate AWS locally, which is hit and miss, depends what you're kind of trying to do with it. Whereas you can run Azure Functions quite simply locally and they'll be triggered by all the same things in the cloud, which is quite nice. So the tooling kind of varies, kind of again what your preferences are, and you could try it out and see what you find. There's a company called Zeit, which I've mentioned and will mention again, which are doing some pretty cool things, which I will show you later. Another thing is that you can end up with quite a lot of architectural complexity. So it starts off pretty simple, right? You've got a client app that's served from a CDN or S3, and you've got some Lambdas that act as your APIs, and you've got some other bits behind that do authentication and your database and bits like that. But that's fine, pretty simple early on. But then as you start to get more complex and start to add new features, you can end up with tens, maybe even more Lambdas, and then that suddenly becomes quite mental to try and figure out what everything is going on, especially if you've got Lambdas that are triggered by Lambdas, and so on and so forth. I've seen someone did a presentation where they had a social network that was run completely from Lambdas, but it was bonkers because they had Lambdas that would put stuff into S3, then Lambdas that would be triggered off that, and then those Lambdas would put them into the database, and then something would be triggered off that, and then they also had Lambdas that called the AWS API to get their billing amount that would send them a report out, and it was, I would dare to debug that because there were so many things being triggered all over the place, it was really quite hard. So you've got to be quite not militant, but quite disciplined when you kind of grow it out, because otherwise you can end up in this place where there's just Lambdas or functions everywhere and you're not really sure what's going on. And also it means, again, focusing on the fact that everything's served up from S3 and you've got your Lambdas, it means that everything's quite fast, which is a great factor for users. Spin up time. Now this is one of the main points that is against functions is if you don't have users hitting your site regularly, you can have them go cold, and you can there's lots of people have lots of different ways of getting around them. So some people have a function that's on a timer. They'll hit your functions every so often to keep them warm. Some people just deal with it and hope that they've got enough users or patient enough. It's kind of a snagging point. It can be a snagging point. It kind of depends what your application's doing. But it is getting better all the time, and it kind of varies quite differently between the cloud providers. So the Lambda spin-up time is quite small, but with Azure Functions, one of the downsides I've noticed is they do have a bit of a longer spin-up time. So again, see what you like, see what's important to your application, because it can vary and it can be a bit of a pain in the arse, especially considering normally the first function that they're going to hit is probably going to be a login one, and you don't want them waiting ages at the login page. So I in my side project, switched from Express over to using functions because I was paying for a Azure App Service that was like £40 a month when I was getting very few users, not very regularly, so there was no point in me paying for this server that was sat there all the time. So I switched over to Azure Functions because I want to save myself some money and just try something new, shiny, I guess. It was pretty straightforward, really. I did find something really cool on Google Cloud Functions, which I'll show you in a bit. The things that I found interesting kind of were the middleware on headers. So I set a load of content security policy and loads of other headers that I applied. And that was interesting on functions because most of them just respond with a 200 in a body. So I created a little function that would wrap them and supply back all the headers I wanted. But it was just a bit fiddly, and you've got to then import that in all of your functions that you use. I have about 30 endpoints on my personal project. So then there's kind of the choice of whether do you want to go on mono repo, or do you have many repos, or do you have just one with 30 functions in, which is what I did just to get started. I'm going to split it out into a mono repo based upon services. And then you've also got to balance out the fact that you're no longer serving everything up from one place. So you've got to deal with cores and figure that out a little bit if you've not done that before. And it's just slightly different, but it wasn't too painful. And there's a really nice thing, Google Functions, which I'll show you in a second. My kind of brief conclusion before I do a bit of a demo is, yeah, it's new and shiny. It's really cool. But you kind of need to decide what's best for your use case and try everything out, because for some applications that need to do really heavy lifting, it's not going to be appropriate because you've got memory limits, you've got CPU limits, you've got time limits. You kind of got to decide what's best for you. There's also obviously a variety of tooling, a variety of tech that you can use. So for example, we're doing our functions that work in Go, because new and shiny again, and also it's really nice to use. I know that's controversial in this room. But that's been really nice, but again, AWS is the only people that support that at the moment. So we can't go cross-cloud if you wanted to. You've got to kind of pick what you want to use. And there's lots to try. There's lots of new things coming out all the time, which is great. Again, also you've got to get your head around it all, but it's great to try all the new stuff out. So you've got to kind of just pick what's best for your application and try it all out, really. So with that, I'm going to point you all to that URL, which is don't judge me on the styling because it is terrible, which is a really quick demo that I definitely did not put together at lunchtime. 1 second, I will just dupe up my screens. So this is a little tiny web page that I put together with the arrows are little buttons, so you can vote on them. And this is using Zeit and Firebase because I presumed that most people would have played or heard of Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. So when you're voting, that's all being replicated in, I've lost the tab now, in this database. So that is being synced live straight from the browser in there. And if I go in and downvote myself, you'll see that that is instantly updated, and likewise, if I hit that, I get that count there as well, which again is all being synced into what Firebase calls its real-time database. It's free, you can hit that as much as you want, it's not going to cost me any money. which is great. I will dive in and show you some of the code. So it's this really simple HTML, got some buttons that trigger some functions.
Can you increase the size of it?
Yes, I can. Probably. Because I wanted a massive sidebar, that's why I wanted VS Code. So I've got a really simple thing. You init this Firebase database, which is their, I'm going to air quote, real-time database. It's basically just a big JSON store, which you can update. You've got this bit, which basically listens on a vote endpoint, and then whenever the value changes, it gets a snapshot out of Firebase, and then that propagates to the values, which then is rendered into the HTML. You've also got this update one, so whenever you clicked the up button, you would update the up property by just incrementing it by 1, and that would be synced by Firebase in the client and then also back to the real-time database. What's great about it is the fact that if you suddenly go offline and you're still hitting the database with updates, so for example, you update your profile and you go to a tunnel on the train, Firebase will deal with all of that for you, hold it in memory, and when you get internet back, it will resync it with the server, which is great because then you don't have to deal with the whole going offline and keeping data cached and keeping stuff in memory. They kind of all do that for you, which is great, especially if you're building like a PWA or single page application that you need to work all the time and offline, especially on trains. And then this bottom one is making just a simple HTTP request to Zeit, down.js, which basically does exactly the same. It gets the value from the database, but just once this time, and just increments the downvote and responds with 200. And so that's pretty straightforward. So what's great about this is it's all running in Firebase, which is hell, I'm taking that compliment. And just to show you that, you can see that number is iterating almost as quickly. But what's great about this is you can do that as much as you like because it's completely free. So they have this free tier here, which includes stuff like you can do phone authentication, so you know when you get you put your phone number and you get a text to log in rather than having to remember username and password. You get 10,000 of those a month, which again for most side projects or bits that you're working on is probably alright. I can have 100 simultaneous connections from browsers to that database. You get a load of stuff in Firestore, which is their new beta version of this real-time database that gives you more capabilities, so you can query and aggregate it on it more, whereas with the real-time database you can't. Again, you get shitloads of storage, a load of executions on the functions. So again, well, this one's only 125,000 invocations per month, but that will do for lots of my side projects and things that I'm working on. Again, phone off, so if you want to do that. Also, that website is hosted on Firebase CDN, and Firebase is owned by Google, so it's effectively on Google CDN. Again, completely for free. They also include other stuff, so if you're building a mobile app, they've got a load of machine learning stuff, a lot of stuff that we have in the browser, but mobile apps generally don't have. So they've got like crash analytics for when if and when your phone app crashes. They've got predictive models, so based upon user behavior, you can predict what they want to see next. They offer A/B testing. It's kind of anything you want to do for an app and web app and or phone app as a service, which is really nice because it's plug and play. And yeah, even the expensive tier, which you can see on the pay-as-you-go level, isn't really that expensive. So that's great. And what I discovered while doing the research for this talk, I'll zoom this in again, is that if you have an Express app, what you can actually do is just export the whole Express app with all your routing exactly as you would if you were running it on an app service or on your server. And they will all become endpoints on your Firebase and or Google Cloud Functions because they're one and the same, which would make the whole migration from Express a lot easier because I split them all up into single Azure Functions. But that would actually make it really easy and really simple. And you just plug one line in and you get serverless Express, which is great. I don't know what the spin-up time is on that. I presume it'd probably be slightly worse than individual server functions because there's a bit more code behind it. But it was pretty cool. and learning something new. What you also saw in that was this Zeit function here, which is really nice. I discovered them on Twitter only about a month ago, but they're doing some really cool stuff. So they are basically now just dealing with serverless stuff. Again, I'll zoom this in. So this is just their dashboard, but they offer this thing called Now, where you can deploy stuff just by typing Now, which is great. And they're doing some really cool stuff. So their pricing plan is free for an infinite number of requests, and pretty much infinite for most things. And even if it's not, it's 99 cents per month, which I'm not going to say is breaking the bank. But again, you can see that the cost for everything is pretty cheap, and if you ever want to run anything, it's quite nice. I only played around with it recently, but it is pretty cool. I'll show you that in a second. They also do this thing called the Nodejs closure compiler, which will basically take, Webpack for your web application will do the exact same thing, but for your backend application. So for stuff like functions, you don't want to pull in 100 meg of node modules, because that's how big the node modules you're using are. This will go through and it'll all pull it into one file, shake it all down so it doesn't include any of the dependencies you don't need, so you don't end up with this massive great big function that's like 100 meg when you're actually only using like 1 meg of node modules, for example, which is really nice, and I think is actually included in the node. It's included somewhere in Nodejs Now by standard, which is quite nice. Just to show you how nice it is, so if we go and respond with a 2 and 2, because I'm lazy, we can just jump in here, do Now, and hopefully the Wi-Fi on this works. Can you all see that just about? Let's see if I can zoom that in more. No. So that is currently deploying up my function. You can pin it, so this it has a slightly different domain because it just does it on a deployment, but you can pin it to a specific domain if you actually have one. But if you wanted to actually just get started or chuck a function up just to see what it performs like, things like that, there you go, deployment complete in 33 seconds. I'm not sure, I believe it's 33 seconds. But that has now put up a new one which will respond with a 202. Which is really simple, and there's basically no config for it. The config that I added was that. So you got the source file, and that it's using now node, which is really nice because if you want to just chuck some stuff together and have a play around really quickly, you can, and it's not very many command lines, and they are doing some really cool stuff. Likewise with the Firebase stuff, so I put this in just the Firebase folder. So if you wanted to deploy Firebase, you literally run this Firebase deploy command, and that will start deploying whatever you've got configured. So I've got hosting configured, so this will release out my index.html straight up to the CDN and do the invalidation of the cache. You can do this again with the functions and anything like that you want to do, which is really nice to play with. Oh, and the Azure Functions, all of the brands, if you wanted to deploy those, you can get the Azure wait, who uses VS Code? Yeah, awesome. There's a Azure plugin if you're using Azure, and this will, when it loads off the internet, will list you can list your functions. There you go. So this will list my functions out, and if I wanted to deploy straight to it, I can deploy straight from VS Code, like that, and deploy out. I'm not going to because it breaks some stuff, but you can deploy out straight from your VS Code. So if you need to get something out really quickly, or just again want to chuck something up, you don't have to faff around with lots of tools, or like someone at work thinks lots of Azure Web UI. You can actually just do it straight from VS Code. You can also access your storage, your database, and everything like that. So the tooling for it is really nice, which I think is one of the nicest ones out of all of the cloud providers. I've used AWS, so I've not really used Google Cloud Functions that much, but the tooling around it, especially if you're in VS Code and a bit of Microsofty world, is super nice. And even if you're not, this is a Linux VM, so it works in Linux, it's not just Windows. Yay. So it's really nice, and you can just get going really quickly with it. One thing I also really like with Azure Functions, so this is my App Insights, which I have clicked a button and is automatically capturing all of the logs that are coming out of any of my functions. It does loads of stuff for me for free, which is really nice. So for example, in this database log of updating a document, it gives everything an invocation ID, which you can jump straight back in and filter to. And update the last time range because it wasn't in the last 3 days. So this has now captured all of the logs for that one. Zoom that in a bit. That's captured all of the logs for that one Azure function invocation, which makes it super nice to debug because you can jump straight in and see what's happening. You can also, if you have an error, you can just view all the telemetry that's 5 minutes before and after, and because the App Insights, if you've ever played with it before, plugs into both your front end and your back end, you can see what page they were on, you can see what requests they were doing, you can then see the function logs off the back of it, or even if you're using an Express app or anything like that, you can capture those logs, and so you can see the exact flow all the way through. You can also add user IDs, so if there's a specific user that you're looking for, you can, that's had an error, you can go find their user ID, plug that in, and it will show you the exact flow that that user's been taking, which is really nice, and you get straight out of the box with Azure Functions because you can enable, well, it's a one-time button in here somewhere. This is when I can't find it in the, it's in there when you create an Azure function. Take my word for it. One thing that I'd like to show you is I mentioned the closure compiler, the NCC from Zeit, which if I jump into my personal project. So you'll see here, get rid of everything else that's popped up in the world. That yes, it looks a bit minging, but this is pulled in. This has pulled in all of the Cosmos DB client stuff that I need to connect to Cosmos DB. This has pulled in everything that this function needs into one single index.js, rather than what it actually looks like, which is something like, not that one, that one. So it actually looks like something like that, where you're just doing the standard require stuff, importing it, exporting your HTTP function. What it's done is actually go through my storage folder and get the Cosmos DB client and all that kind of stuff that I need out of there and put it into one single file. So rather than having, I think it was about 68 meg of node modules dependencies because of Azure, Stripe, some other stuff that I was using, it actually reduces it down to about 20 meg. So rather than having to spin up a massive, great big blob of 68 meg, you're actually spinning up even less than that, so your cold start times are a bit lower, which is great because it's something that's been struggling a little bit with Azure Functions. Has a couple of seconds cold start time, which on my side project is always on the login page or sign up page, which is not the first user experience you want. I considered doing a warming function, but I've not just done it yet. So yeah, in conclusion, they're new and shiny. I would highly recommend trying them out and seeing what you like and seeing what you don't, because there will be stuff that you're a bit like, it's a bit annoying. So like this file stuff we've been doing at work where there's a memory limit, so we have to be really efficient reading a file in. But then there's loads of really nice stuff because you get going really quickly. You don't have to deal with any of the server configuration or keeping the stuff up to date because someone else who is better at it is doing that for you, or certainly better than me is doing that for you. It's really cost effective, but you do have some downsides and some trade-offs. If anyone has any questions, just send me tweet me or find me afterwards. Where are my links? There we go. There we go. Yeah, and I'm by no means an expert, but we can chat about it. One thing that I do have to ask, actually, audience question, is if anyone's doing serverless, have you done database migrations? Because we're having this kind of thought, thinking about this at work at the minute because we are still using a SQL database. We're going to go NoSQL eventually, but we haven't got that yet. And we're just trying to figure out how to do database migration. So if anyone has any wild ideas, that'd be great. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.